But what I would like to do now is I'm going to pull up my notes so that I'm not saying anything wrong this time and I'm not forgetting anything. Although in this particular case, it should be fairly easy for me because it is a real pleasure for me to invite the next speaker. It's going to be Dr. Fay Cobb Payton. I had the pleasure of meeting her. I mentioned to you Dr. Gilda Barbino, who's somebody amazing that I met a number of years ago. She introduced me to Dr. Fay Cobb Payton, who is another absolutely astounding individual. And she's going to grace us with her presence by telling us about some of the amazing, a bit of a mashup of the research that she's done and telling us what else needs to happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. There you go. Yeah, I don't like these things. I don't like podiums. So how's everyone? Good. We need some energy in this room. Can everybody stand up for just a minute? I don't know if you need to touch your toes, stretch over. I do yoga, you know, fist bump the next person, but we need energy in the room today, okay? All right, so let's get started. Thanks for having me. It is a pleasure for me to be here. Let's see, where am I supposed to point this? Where am I supposed, there we go, okay. So it's a pleasure for me to be here. I am going to get started. I think I have 25 minutes and I do have a lot to say. And I do want to respond to some of what I heard, right? So I come from this place, right? As was mentioned from the, from the panelists, that we all bring biases to whatever it is that we do. So these are places that I have been in my life. So I'm an engineer by training. I'm a rambling wreck from Georgia Tech. But I'm also a graduate of Clark Atlanta University, which is an HBCU. I worked in industry before taking the plunge into higher education because I thought by leaving industry, which was an abyss for me as a Black woman in tech, right? I thought that going to get my PhD and going into higher ed, I had this escapism. Yeah, you're right. That's just, yeah. It was a bad move in terms of escapism, right? So those are places that I've worked. And then I spent the last 4 years of my life at the National Science Foundation as a program director. I just left earlier this year, which is where I met this great gentleman and helped to support some of his work, and including this conference. And I also did an American Council on Education Fellowship. Are there any ACE fellows in here? No. So I thought, let me go into higher education leadership. That will give me a different experience. I'm gonna go back. I'm checking all these boxes. What you want? I got an engineering degree. I do computer science. I do information science. I can analyze data. I can do mixed methods. I can triangulate. I worked in corporate. I worked in New York City. I worked down south. I worked in the Valley. I checked boxes. You go, girl. But what did that get me? And that's the point. The girl didn't go. I wasn't embraced. I was different, right? I was different. And so what is it about me that made me different, right? I didn't see very many people that looked like me, especially at the full professor role, especially in corporate leadership or in higher education leadership for that matter. So I checked all the boxes. Point is, sometimes meritocracy is a fallacy. So the girl didn't go. This is a picture. I read Smithsonian Magazine. I don't know how many of you do, but many years ago, there was this picture. It's Smithsonian Magazine. I'm looking at it reverse order, but I know what's on this slide. It said, the next Silicon Valley. Any observations? I'm still looking for me, right? I'm still looking for me. This was not too long ago. This was about 3 years ago. And there was the projection of, what are these wonderful people going to do to bless all of us with new technology? Where am I in DEI, A, B? I don't see me, right? So, one thing I love about this city is I love Times Square. And at the heart of it, for me, is that I'm an artist. And Hamilton is one of my favorite musicals. Particularly the question that is asked, who's in the room where it happens? And I was never invited in those rooms, right? And so, in fact, the bottom picture of the 4 founding fathers, when Chris came on stage and said, Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, my daughter was in the audience with me and she said, where is he, Mom? Because her mental model of what George Washington should look like and who was on that stage was very different. I'm getting to my research because I'm giving you this background because it matters. Because if we're going to address the wicked problems, and I say wicked, whether it's climate change, sustainability, access to housing, whatever the problem may be, and we do have some wicked problems. Young people, we need you. We need different perspectives, but we have to have a room where it happens, where we call on others that have different backgrounds. So, diversity, equity, inclusion, I'm not going to read all of that, but I do want to spawn the equity piece. Because one of the things I noticed as an NSF program director is that you can collaborate with HBCUs. You can collaborate with tribal colleges. You can collaborate with Hispanic institutions. But in my mind, equity is built in the budget. The money, okay? Equity is built in the budget. And that's a fact. I know because I wrote a new solicitation that only focused on partnerships with HBCUs, tribal colleges, and Hispanic serving institutions with research ones, right? And so that equity piece sometimes is hard to quantify, regardless of what kind of data that you have. So, you know, I'm still looking for me in terms of women of color, right? And this is some of the, some of the quotes that I was able to put. This is a horrible angle for me to see, and looking at that is backwards, right? So I'm looking in this mirror and it's backwards, right? So that's an optics thing, right? But it's hard to see yourself growing in a place where you don't see yourself represented. Shirley Malcolm said it's not impossible, but it is hard, okay? Well, in my space, like Heather, because I've been knowing Heather for quite some time, who was on the last panel, like Heather being in computing, we're almost at 2024. We're almost at 2024. Regardless, 70 by the Bureau of Labor Statistics says, regardless of your discipline, 76 to almost 80% of the new position creation will have some level of compute. So in other words, what you need to do in terms of DEIA here on campus, you've got to teach students how to analyze data and interpret data contextually, because that's where the workforce is going. Like it or not, whether you're going to be entrepreneurial, research, or you're going to join industry or a nonprofit, you're going to need to analyze data. You're going to need some computing skills. And this is a quite old slide, and it's dated. And I left it in there because this shows you what was going on in 2015, 16 in terms of representation in tech. Where do you think we are now today? Where are we today? Even worse. Even worse. Very little has changed. Very little has changed. And in terms of people of color, one thing I will say about people of color, women of color, I don't know who you're talking about. And I used to always say, please disaggregate the data. Even if it does mean that there's only that one person, you may not necessarily say with that one person or attach a specific context to that one person, but strategies related to people of color means that we're all a monolith, which we're not. Even amongst women of color, we're not all a monolith. Heather said it best. See, it's easier to swallow when Heather says strategies for women meant white women, not black, brown, Latinx, and other black and brown women, right? But what this shows in Silicon Valley, I don't even have to read the data, but Hispanics and Asians and blacks in terms of number of professionals, those that go into management, and that go into the executive, that's director or C-suite. Numbers haven't changed, right? It's pretty much, in other words, it's pretty much a flat line in some cases, right, over the years. This is longitudinal data. But what I do see in terms of rethinking DEI in tech, I often hear this because some people say it's the moral imperative. It's the right thing to do. Nothing happens when there's the right thing to do. Nothing. I'm here to tell you, nothing happens because morally someone says it's the right thing to do. Am I right? I'm like you, Leo. I'm here to have real talk. Right? I am not going to sugarcoat it. The moral imperative will get no one to move. It takes a special kind of leader to do that. That's a bold, transformative leader. Here in higher education, that means going against your tenure track faculty, going against your faculty senate, going against your state, right? When we have a state system that oversees what happens on campus, policies and procedures, funding models, all of that. Or you can say, some people say, I want the ROI. That's definitely a business thing. What's the return on my investment? I put 5 students through physics. What is my return on investment? That's what's asked, right? And those things, sometimes you are applying, and like I recently said at an industry conference where I was the keynote, I said, you're applying a short-term metric to a long-term systemic problem. That's a malalignment. Thank you. You can clap. It's okay. It's malalignment. And then, of course, there's the national competitiveness imperative. I heard this one a lot at NSF. It's a national competitive. We got to compete with the world. We got to compete. Well, when did we stop competing with the world? You know? And if you think about it, where is the talent going to come from? And I've often said, there's a report, and I love my colleagues at the agency, that said that there are missing millions. Now, I also know that if I ran a traffic light yesterday, tomorrow I will have a ticket in my email with sensors and technology. You know exactly where I am. I'm not missing. I'm not missing. So even the language that we use in this DEI space needs to be examined. So I call these sort of these intersectional moments because we talked about intersectionality. I wrote this little book called Leveraging Intersectionality. These certainly were intersectional moments in tech, right? Intersectional moments. Microsoft CEO says, you know, women, we should just be happy with where we are, and over time, salaries will rise to just be patient, women. How much do women make on the dollar per mil? What is it? 74%. Ladies, how many of you want your extra coins? Yes. Because the time value of money says interest is accruing and we're missing it. See? And then there are others, right? you know, the Getty pictures, and you know what happens when it comes to missing women in the C-suites. So I was looking for me. And on one day in my office at NC State, one of my graduate students, who, by the way, was a medical doctor, had come back to get her MBA. She said, I want to work with you. Great. I want to write this paper. Go find me some images. Go find me some images of me on the internet. Go find me some. This was the impetus for the study that was published here in the communication of the ACM. Because I asked Natalia, please go find me some images so I can put it in the paper. I want to see a Black woman at a computer or in an engineering context. And I put up here, oh, the biases of the algorithm and the search, right? This is what she brought back, and I was looking for me. I was missing, which brought us to the point where imagery and representation matters. We did this study on what does it mean to be female in computer science, computing largely. What we found was these were the images that we were able to find. These literally were the images that we were able to find by doing a web scrub, right? Young people in the room, you probably don't know, this is my right, your left. The fingernail, you probably don't know what that tape thing is, but that was a storage mechanism, right? So we stored things not in the cloud, but they were on tape, right? And so these were the images. And by the way, the Newsweek article was from the 2000s. These were other images. Okay, young people, you probably don't know, but the woman is holding a modem. That's a modem, right? These were images that we literally found from what was it like to be a female in computing. Yeah, very interesting. Who are these women? NASA, but what are they called? Computers. They were called computers. They were coders. When you think of coders now, what do they look like? Do they look like that? No. I wondered if I had known that when I was 10 years old. I didn't. And it really matters, right? That was, to me, was like one of the most powerful scenes in the movie, right? In Hidden Figures, like, these are computers. These are coders. And what we found in that research is that something called identity theory, the degree to which one identifies with the work that is being done. Identity theory says that if you have a mental model of how you see the work and you can align with that work, then those are the places and spaces where you are most likely to engage, to enroll, to pursue a degree. And from our work, what we concluded was that ordinary male counterparts can be ordinary. Males can be ordinary. Females, you have to be exceptional. Remember, she said, go girl. I had to check a lot of boxes, right? Women of color had greater challenges, particularly when it came to needing to be significantly better than their peers. We found that. Did a web scrub. But what was interesting is what the reviewers in the peer review process came back and asked us. If men can be ordinary and women be exceptional, as a woman of color, what must you be? I was like, oh, we have to put that in the paper. Because I'm still grappling with that. What must I be, right? So we also determined that, why do we think that this matters in 2016, 17, 18, after the study had been published? Well, you hear about photos and technology and how it biases and facial recognition and how it is used. The biases don't just stop at the search engine. They continue. And so we then published a piece on algorithms that are used in the hiring process. Now remember, for me, like you, Leo, what is interesting is that I find that a lot of my research has come as a result of my interactions with my students. Students said to me, I can't get a nugget. I can't get a reply on an online system, a hiring platform that will remain nameless. I said, well, bring me your resume. What does your resume look like? He said, I changed it up. I've de-blackened my resume. That's what he said, right? Wow. He wasn't the only one. Some of my Asian students said the same thing. So I said, well, what is that? We have to investigate that. You can't fix students and not address the systemic issues. It's the ecology model. You fix the students like we clean the fish, but we put them back in the Exxon Valdez water. What are we doing? So we took a look at hiring practices. We centered on a theory of design justice, which says that for us, by us, nothing without. We, your community, your population needs to be involved in the design of whatever it is that you do. We recognized a number of biases that were at play here. One, data set bias. Two, the association bias, automation bias. You heard that. The system put you in seat 35D. That's not on the plane. The system, right? Interaction bias and confirmation bias. And sometimes I would say an NSF halo bias. Just because you're the great researcher doesn't mean that this proposal deserves to be rewarded. It's based on merit. There are two factors that come into play. So our work in design justice suggested that in the hiring process, a number of these could be at play, particularly with online hiring platforms. Some of this is just saying, what is it that we observed? What is it that we concluded? That piece was picked up by IEEE and put into their weekly news channel. But also, what I have observed in my research, because I do a lot of healthcare research. How many minutes do I have? How am I looking on time? Okay, so in terms of my healthcare research, which is very near and dear to me, my healthcare research says that, and particularly Oblinger, Oglemeyer, who published in Science 2019, that said algorithms falsely conclude that Black patients are more healthier than sick white patients. Structural inequities and proxy variables in your data can be just as harmful as anything in terms of making decisions, in terms of creating treatment plans, in terms of deploying resources. We found that historical significance matters. Historical significance matters. Why is that? Because sometimes you often hear that mentoring is needed, sponsorship is needed, allyship is needed. All these words sound really great. But oftentimes, we find that in certain populations, it's like the dog chasing its tail. Sameness in network, sameness in thoughts, we find particularly in social and professional networks, create sameness in the system. You're gonna recruit from the same set of schools, from the same advisors, you're gonna hire from the same places and spaces. I do want to show you this. This was a piece, that one didn't come out very well, but this one is a piece that we published around, oh, wait a minute. I'll just start there. So in the healthcare context, we took a look at diabetes and the intersection of diabetes and HIV, diabetes and obesity, diabetes and heart disease. We were interested in the ways in which diseases cling together called comorbid conditions. Nothing exists in isolation in healthcare was our premise. What we determined is all of these things. What I do want to point out is that ethnic groups have poor outcomes and are less likely to have been discharged to routine locations, home, or to a care facility. What we found is when we got the data were dirty. And so if you're running an algorithm and you haven't scrubbed that data, or you haven't used the proper training data, or you ignore outliers, which really can tell you some things if you analyze them, you missed the opportunity. You missed the opportunity, and that's what we learned. We have all the GML models. If you want to take a look at it, we use AHRQ data. We also determined this, and I did some work with an organization in DC, taking a look at AI and racial biases in healthcare. And I don't know about this campus, but I do feel the need to say this: mental health matters. At NC State, we've had some issues. Across the country, there have been issues. Students have said, and we published this paper years ago, that talked about what kinds of services are on a campus to help students, all students, matriculate and have a good, positive experience. If you do nothing out of this conversation today, take a look at that paper. It lays some groundwork by looking at models that have been done across the country. And we use the natural language processing methodology to really say, what does the literature say? And we tried to use different types of methods to understand what was going on campuses. I'd say, last thing I want to say, because I know we're running out of time. I know we talk about pipelines. I know we talk about pathways. We got to move forward. There are intrinsic barriers related to pipelines, related to pathways, because pathways make assumptions, and really think about ecosystems. Thinking about the entirety of one's matriculations, one's experience, regardless of what that may be. This is a paper that we wrote that appeared in MIT Tech Review that talked about what is missing. What is missing in the ecosystem? And how can you collaborate strategically to address issues and problems associated with STEM and with tech? So I'll run it back because I saw it. Lastly, I want to say this. We talked about intersectionality. I get it. Well, you can check all the boxes. What is often not talked about with intersectionalities are systems of oppression. Everybody wants to count. You want to put me in a box. Put me in a box. But understand the context for which one navigates and one lives. The lived experience matters. And so from the book, what I said was, there are points of exploration. Those points of exploration is not who's managing, but who's leading. Image and representation matters. Please devoid your organizations of deficit model thinking. It saddles everyone, not just the group that's not in the minority or the majority. And stay informed. When it comes to points of action, you know, I sort of lay these out, and I do say DEI does not mean lowering the bar. It does not mean lowering the bar. It means innovating and allowing everyone to innovate and recognizing that, and I appreciated this. You know, everybody will go online and they'll take the implicit bias test. What does that do? What does that do? Exactly. What does that do? Some biases are not so implicit. What we need to do collectively is decide, how are we going to embed these in policies that impact environments? What are the policies? A couple of things that I mentioned around equitable ecosystems there, and we can talk about this after the break or during the break. And with that, I'll say thank you, and I'll move out of the way.